she said in a low tone, looking around the crowd. What's got into you, Wine? Why are you acting weird? Since Kim's family has returned, you haven't met them. Aren't you and Theon lovers? At least friends? Wine bit her lips. Her heart sank at the thought of Theon. Did something happen between you both? Wine swiftly shook her head in denial. No, Mom, it's just that I'm nervous. After all, I'm meeting them after so long, she said, fidgeting her fingers. Mrs. Han nodded, patting her shoulder. If you were the Wine in the past, then I would have believed you were nervous. But still, it's okay, don't be nervous. Wine's eyes turned cold, thinking about the past. When did you meet him? Grandma's voice grabbed her attention. No, she shook her head in denial. Mom, I don't understand her. What's got into her? She has changed a lot. Mrs. Han spoke hurriedly. It's not time to nag, we'll talk about it later. She turned to Wine and opened her mouth to speak, but stopped saying Theon. Here Theon is. Wine lifted her head, their eyes locked after 4 years of separation, and a flood of emotions washed over them. Wine felt a mix of longing and heartache, wondering how they drifted so far apart. Theon stood right in front of her. Wine's eyes fell on his hand, which Clara was holding. The sight of it stirred up memories of their happy times. Once they used to be this close. Wine, where were you? Why didn't you meet Theon? She spoke with a sweet smile, leaning onto Theon, who was mesmerized, staring at Wine. Despite his claim of hatred, a storm of conflicting emotions brewed within him. Beneath the facade of anger lay a deep well of unresolved love and longing. She just arrived, Grandma answered Clara, breaking Theon's trance. Clara held back an urge to roll her eyes. With a frown, Theon glanced at Clara. Wine, why are you so quiet? Go on. She slightly pushed Wine towards Theon, who released his arm from Clara, passing her a dead stare. What? She asked, dumbfounded. Theon felt a sense of calmness coursing down his soul, hearing her voice after so long. What do we do when we meet our loved ones after so long? Wine stared at her blankly. We hug them. Why are you both shy? Wine almost choked while Clara clenched her fist. Go on. Wine hesitantly stepped closer to him, biting her lips. Theon stared at her for a while and encircled his arms around her, holding her close to his chest. Wine felt as if her years of weirdness was lifted. Her eyes glistened to his familiar touch and inhaling his familiar cologne. She wrapped her arms around him, losing herself in the moment until Theon's grasp tightened, making it hard for her to breathe. Leave me, she whispered to him. I see, does that hurt? He even tightened his grip. What are you doing? This pain is nothing in front of the pain you have caused me, he muttered in a dark voice. Clara's voice caused him to release her. Simone is here, Wine. She let out a sigh of relief at the sight of Simone. Wine turned to face Simone, and a wide smile appeared on her face, causing Theon to clench his fist. After greeting Grandma, he moved to Wine and embraced her in a mom hug. Where were you these days? Theon excused himself while Grandma gestured for Clara to follow her. Simone broke the hug and looked around before fixing his gaze on Wine. I have a good news for you and bad news as well, he said confidentially and dragged Wine to a corner. What is it? She asked with a thumping heart. I have found who is behind your kidnapping pictures, sending them to Theon and creating a misunderstanding between you both. She stared at him with both relief and impatience. Who? Her throat went dry. Your sister Clara. Wine's heart sank. She was suspicious about Clara and prayed to be proved wrong. That freaking psychopath is obsessed with him. What? She barely whispered with quivering lips. Hey, don't cry, he said and pulled her into a hug. Theon stared at them with a burning gaze and gulped the beer. I'm fine, I just want to be alone for a while, she pulled out. Simone nodded and walked away. Wine stood taking long breaths. It was hard to accept that the person whom she trusted the most betrayed her. Wine didn't know how much time had passed until she heard Theon's deep voice. Have you gone deaf? She held an urge to throw herself into his embrace and cry her heart out, tell him about the pain she is still going through. My attention was elsewhere. Yeah, I can see that. His tone reeked of sarcasm. Wine clenched her jaw. What do you want? Dance. He took a step closer to her. Let's dance. She stared at him with disbelief. I would puke rather than dancing with you, but my mom wants us to dance. shifted her gaze to 𝐷𝐿. Fine, she muttered and walked to the dance floor followed by 𝐷𝐿. They stood in front of each other, staring dead into each other's eyes. 𝐷𝐿 placed his hand on her waist and pulled her closer, while 𝐽𝐿 placed her hands on his shoulders. They began swaying with the music. Their gazes held oceans of emotion. 𝐷𝐿's hand traveled to her hair. He intertwined his fingers in her hair and moved his face closer to her. Didn't I tell you, never cut your hair? His voice held anger. 𝐽𝐿 stared at him with hollow eyes. That shouldn't matter. We are over and you hate me, remember? 𝐷𝐿 pursed his lips. You forced me to do that. You betrayed me. He released her hand and pulled her in closer. There's no need to explain anything to you. You're not the same person anymore. Neither are you. You were never like this, or I guess I was mistaken to recognize you. Both of them went silent, staring at each other until 𝐽𝐿 spoke. Why didn't you tell your parents we broke up? I can ask you the same question, 𝐽𝐿 chuckled. Because my grandma likes you a lot and I don't want her to be heartbroken and hate you. 𝐷𝐿 clenched his jaw. Even if you had told your parents, they would have been fine with it as long as we are happy. She shrugged her shoulders and pulled out, walking away. Time skipped. After a few days, Grandma invited Kim's family for dinner. Now they all were seated across the table, gossiping about random things. 𝐽𝐿 spent the whole day locked up in the room until Grandma called her for dinner. She could feel 𝐷𝐿's gaze persistently on her, making her nervous. Grandma's voice averted her attention. I want to talk to you about something. Everyone went silent and stared at her. As you all know, 𝐽𝐿 and 𝐷𝐿 has a very good understanding. I and 𝐷𝐿's great-grandmother made a promise to get them married. 𝐽𝐿's heart sank. She glanced at 𝐷𝐿 with surprise, while 𝐷𝐿 was no different from her. You spoke my heart. I wanted to talk about this as well. Clara tightened her grip on the fork, locking her dark gaze on 𝐽𝐿. As soon as 𝐽𝐿 glanced at her, shiver ran down her spine. First time in her life she felt fear. That's great. I think the kids are in the age to be married. How about we fix the wedding date? 𝐷𝐿, 𝐽𝐿, I hope you don't have any objection. 𝐽𝐿 choked the air. 𝐷𝐿 stared at her thoughtfully and then his lips curled up into a smirk. 𝐽𝐿 opened her mouth to speak, but 𝐷𝐿 stood and cut her off. Not at all, Grandma. In fact, both of us want to get married as soon as possible. Right, 𝐽𝐿? He said with the sweetest smile possible. 𝐽𝐿 stared at him with a gape. She swiftly stood. I know. 𝐷𝐿 walked towards her and held her hand. Mom, Dad, fix the date as soon as you can. But Mom, Clara is older. I want to get her married first. I want to fulfill the promise I made to her parents. Yes, Grandma, Mom is right. Clara and 𝐷𝐿 both passed her a death stare. Don't worry about Clara. She's my granddaughter as well. I'll look after her. 𝐷𝐿 dragged 𝐽𝐿 to her room. What are you doing? Leave me. He tightened his grip and flung her into her room, closing the door. What's wrong with you? She grabbed him by the collar. 𝐷𝐿 glanced at her hands on his collar and locked his gaze on her face. Believe me, the 𝐽𝐿 I know was never so bold. I like this side of yours, he said in a low tone, rubbing his thumb over her lips. Shut up and tell me why you told them to fix the wedding date. Don't you hate me? Don't you feel disgusted by me? She muttered and released his collar with a jerk. 𝐷𝐿 chuckled, shoving his hands into his pockets. Trust me, I hate you, but at the same time, I want to snatch your independence, and I'll limit you to myself. You'll pay for every pain you have caused me. He spoke darkly. 𝐽𝐿 chuckled bitterly and shook her head. You never had trust in me in the first place. He grabbed her by the shoulders and pulled her closer. Trust? I asked you several times about those intimate pictures. You were the one who admitted it was true. You would hang out with Simon, have quality time with him, and lied to me. Those pictures were not even edited. You expect me to trust you after seeing you in Simon's arms and keeping me in the dark. He released her. The anguish was visible in his eyes. A lump formed in 𝐽𝐿's throat. She tried to speak, but her voice was stuck in her throat. You must pay for everything, 𝐽𝐿. He darkly chuckled and turned to leave. Everything has a backstory. Don't do something you would regret later. He turned back to face her. 𝐽𝐿 lowered her head, but 𝐷𝐿 saw the tears in her eyes. He felt a pang in his chest. Once he vowed he would never let a tear in her eyes, but today he was the reason for her tears. Suddenly he felt suffocated and walked out. Wedding day. Time passed in a blink of an eye, and finally was normal between them. One assumed it to be a part of his revenge against her. Now it was almost midnight and they came to their room as they had held the reception as well. One stared at him who had his back pressed against the door while staring at her with red bloodshot eyes. A laugh erupted his throat as he slid down the door. "We are drunk," he said in a drunken tone. Wine also joined his laugh. "Come here," he said, patting on the floor beside him. Wine walked towards him while stumbling and flopped beside him. "My head is spinning," she said and burst into tears, holding her head. "Hey, don't cry, I will give you a massage, come here." He spoke, trying hard to keep his eyes open, and pulled her onto his lap. Wine laid on his lap, mumbling something while pointing at the ceiling, with tears still running down her face. "You're so bad thing, you hate me," she sobbed and sat straight. "I don't," he said anxiously. "You do," she said with a pout and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Tam held her by the nape of her neck and captured her lips. Wine tangled her fingers in his hair without hesitation and deepened the kiss. "I love you and I always will," he said between the kiss. "They make me believe it," she said seductively and pressed her lips on his neck. The heat of the moment and the drunkenness had made them forget what they were doing. Few days later, after their wedding, the next morning when Wine woke up and saw her condition, a sense of mistrust arose in her heart. Tam wasn't in the room. She assumed Tam did it purposely to take his revenge on her. During the passing days, Tam acted as if nothing happened. They didn't interact much, but still she could feel he was good to her. It was too much to take, which led to the club every night and getting drunk. Tam was busy establishing his business and trying to find out what happened these past years when he wasn't around. Now he was waiting for Wine as it was pretty late at night and she hadn't returned. The door creaked open, grabbing his attention. Wine entered, rubbing her forehead. "Where were you?" He stood and moved closer to her. Wine looked at him with raised brows and shook her head. "That's none of your business." She was about to walk past him, but he held her by the arm. "Did you drink?" he asked with a frown, sniffing her. Wine released her arm with a jerk. "Yes, I did, and went to club, so what?" She spoke furiously. "You have been in the club all this while." "Yes, every night I go there. Now if you want to accuse me of cheating or betraying you, I don't give a damn," she said and walked into the washroom, leaving Tam dumbfounded. Where was his Wine, the girl who was scared to go to the clubs? All these days he was trying hard to control his anger and start a new life with Wine. Since the day he decided to marry her, he has been at peace. He knows Wine will never betray him, but what forced her to lie to him? He let out a sigh and laid on the bed waiting for her to come out. After a few minutes, Wine came out and laid on the bed without sparing him a glance. Then stared at her back and switched off the lights. He laid beside her, staring at her back, and scooted closer to her. "Are you crying?" His low voice rang in her ears, but Wine remained silent. Then wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her close to his chest. "Leave me," she wiggled in his grip, hitting him with her elbows, but he held her tightly and pressed his left cheek against her right. "Why are you crying?" he whispered. Wine's body went stiff, feeling his hot breath on her face. "Tell me what's the matter. I have been yearning to hear from you, but you never shared anything. Why?" She wept. Tears trickled down her face. "You took advantage of me," she mumbled, then turned her to face him. "When did I take advantage?" She clenched her jaw. "Stop acting innocent. On our wedding day, it was all planned by you. You urged your friends to make me drink a lot so that you can take advantage." She slapped him on the chest and shook his head. "Why would I do that? I was also drunk. Don't you remember?" "That means you don't remember you were being wild and seduced me." She slapped him on the chest again. "You're accusing me. I hate you so much. I'll divorce you soon." He grabbed her jaw gently and moved her face closer. "Say that again and I will cut off your tongue. Don't forget you hate me. I have betrayed you and those bitches." He let out a sigh and closed his eyes. "I don't hate you. I know you didn't betray me." She stared at him confusedly. "But why did you say that?" He gently brushed the hair away from her face, and with a gentle motion he pressed his hand against her cheek. "I wanted to provoke you so that you would tell me the truth. I want to hear from you. I could have gotten my sources to find out about it, but I wanted you to trust me enough and share it all. I guess I wasn't trustworthy. Even on that night when they were discussing our wedding date, I intentionally said all those things about you and Simone, but you didn't say a word. He whispered with a faint smile when held his hand and shook her head. I didn't want you to be worried, neither I was in the state to talk about it. As for Simone, he was by my side all this time. He's my savior. He took care of me when I had a panic attack. Those pictures were all related to it, but the person sent it to you created a misunderstanding. They stared into each other's eyes. So much happened to you that you had panic attacks, yet no one bothered to tell me. He lay straight, staring at the ceiling. I knew the unknown number from which I have been receiving your pictures is Clara. After 6 months when you left, I was kidnapped. They kept me there for a month and a half. I was drugged. They took intimate pictures with me and sent them to you. My body was numb. I could just see and hear them. They cut my hair as per Clara's order, as she knew you liked my hair. Simone somehow found me and took me to the hospital. Clara still had them after me until the police caught one of them, but he died while others ran out of the country. Theon turned to face her. I wasn't there for you when you needed me the most. His eyes shimmered. He had no words to describe how he felt. I deserve your hatred. I don't hate you, neither do I blame you. It's all Clara's obsession. She moved closer to him. I'm sorry, I should have told you earlier. She kissed him on the cheek. Of course you should have. All this drama wouldn't have happened. She just nodded, staring at him intently. What happened? She quietly buried her face in his chest and sobbed softly. Trust me, you're drunk. That's why you're telling me all these things. I'm not. He softly stroked her hair, wine pulled out and glared at him. You're tipsy. He poked her cheek with his finger. Why did you leave the room and didn't talk about our wedding night? Her stuttering was testimony that she was drunk, and shook his head and held her close to his chest. I didn't want to make things awkward, so I acted like nothing happened. He kissed her on the forehead with devotion. I don't know if you'll remember this tomorrow or not, he mumbled, holding her tightly. Thanks. The next day, Wine remembered everything. She was glad even if she was drunk, she talked it out. They wanted to take things slow, so he decided to start over and build a strong bond, which was fine with Wine. Today it's been 3 days since Wine came to her parents' house. Theo has been persistently urging her to come back, but her grandma wanted her to stay a bit more. Clara's behavior was normal with her. Wine thought she might have backed off. Now Wine sat on the bed with a wide smile as she discovered her pregnancy. She was eager to see Theon's reaction, while at the same time her heart was anxious for some reason. She dialed Theon's number, but the door opened, revealing Clara. She walked towards Wine with a wide smile. Do you want something? She asked dryly, lowering her phone. Clara chuckled, moving closer to her. I just thought to bid farewell to my little nephew or niece. Wine stood with a thumping heart. What do you mean? She barely mumbled, placing her hand on her womb. The juice you drank a few minutes ago. She stopped and stepped forward. I had poisoned it. You'll lose your baby soon, maybe your life as well. Wine stared at her with disbelief. You don't mean it, right? Her mind went numb. She couldn't understand what to do. I'm not kidding. As soon as she said it, she felt a sharp pain in her cheek. Are you even a human? What has my unborn child done to you? Wine yelled at her and placed another slap on her face. Clara laughed like a maniac. I tried so hard to throw you out of Theon's life, but that bastard married you and is having a child with you. I'll destroy each and everything that separates me from Theon. She muttered. Wine's face was drenched with tears. She placed her hand on her womb, feeling a sharp pain. She could see Clara's lips moving while her voice faded. Soon Wine passed out and fell on the floor with a thud. Next day, Wine opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling blankly. The events of the last night flashed before her eyes. She almost jumped and looked around the familiar room. Her eyes landed on Theon, who was asleep on the chair beside her bed. Theon, she mumbled, placing her hand on his arm. Theon lifted his head. Relief washed over him, seeing her awake. Wine, are you okay? Do you feel any pain? Should I call the doctor? He sat beside her and held her by the shoulders. Wine shook her head, biting her lips. Her baby, she whispered, placing her hand on her womb. The gleam in Theon's eyes disappeared. He shook his head. Tears rolled down her eyes. Forget it, at least you're fine. That's what matters the most. He hugged her. Wine cried his hysterically on his chest. I hadn't even felt him. I shouldn't have been so careless. He stroked her back. Don't blame yourself. We can have more babies. I just want you to be fine. Wine pulled out. Where is Clara? How did I come here? He wiped her tears gently. I was on the call and heard your conversation. I rushed there as soon as I heard Clara. As for Clara, she is in mental asylum. I made sure she doesn't come out until the rest of her life. Wine just nodded, lowering her gaze. I don't understand why she hates me so much. I have always seen her as my sister. She rested her head on his shoulder. She is jealous of you and in short she is mentally ill. He shook his head with disgust. Your parents and grandma are out there waiting for you. I don't want to see anyone yet. She snuggled closer to him, then wrapped his arms around her, giving her a sense of warmth and comfort. What is that? She asked, pointing at the coffee table and pulling out. Flower bouquet for you. He stood and brought it to her. One stared at them with confusion. Last night I was planning to take you on a date. I bought these, but Destiny had some other plans. He spoke with a gloomy smile and held the bouquet in front of her. One smiled, holding them. What is this? She looked at him confusingly. A crown? Then smiled and nodded. A crown for my queen. He cupped her face, staring right into her eyes. I'm sorry for hurting you. I failed to protect you every time. Even yesterday I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry for everything. Only if I hadn't left you. His eyes shimmered and he pressed his forehead against her. I'm a failure. I couldn't even protect my child. Wine sniffed and kissed him on the lips softly. I'm responsible for everything as well. If I had told you everything earlier, this wouldn't have happened. I didn't even let my parents tell you anything. Then let out a sigh. Dwelling on the past doesn't matter. She nodded. Tell my parents I'm awake. They must be worried. He held her hand and kissed it. I love you. He stood. She smiled widely in response. I love you more. He walked out while Wine leaned on the headboard, closing her eyes.